She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call security, she just placed one black business card on the counter and an entire hotel empire began to crumble. The receptionist smirked when she handed him her Centurion card. He thought she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. But what he didn't know, was that this black woman wasn't just a guest, she was the final decision maker behind a $2.8 billion deal. And in less than 48 hours. His smile would vanish, his job would disappear, and the world would know her name. Stay with us because what happens next isn't just corporate karma, it's a masterclass in quiet power. This is the story of Celeste Morgan, and how silent dignity dismantled an empire. The sliding glass doors of the Monarch Plaza Hotel whispered open with a soft hiss. The morning light glinted off their polished chrome edges, casting a warm halo onto the marble lobby. A woman stepped inside, the rhythm of her heels a measured, commanding cadence against the granite floor. Each step didn't demand attention, it commanded it. She wore a midnight navy pantsuit, tailored so precisely it seemed sculpted onto her tall, lean frame. Her skin, a deep bronze hue kissed by sun and success, shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. Her presence didn't shout, but it filled the room. She was grace wrapped in discipline, calm cloaked in power. No one knew her name. Not yet. But they would. At the reception desk, Jordan Voss, a white man in his early 30s with a platinum name tag and hair gelled back to perfection, was finishing a fake smile for the departing couple from Kansas. He adjusted his gold tie pin and turned back to his screen. He was the kind of hotelier who prided himself on spotting the right kind of guest. It wasn't in the training manual, but it was there in the unspoken code: judge quickly, serve selectively, smile conditionally. Celeste Morgan walked straight to the desk. Jordan looked up and froze for a split second. His eyes scanned from her patent leather heels to her Armani suit, and finally rested on her face. Or more precisely, on her skin. There was a flicker barely noticeable, but unmistakable to anyone who'd seen it before. A curl at the corner of his lips, part amusement, part dismissal. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, voice flat as the glass countertop between them. "How can I assist you today?" Celeste placed her Chanel tote lightly on the desk, reached inside, and retrieved her phone. Her nails were clean, short, practical. Everything about her said this was a woman used to decisions, not decorations. "Celeste Morgan," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "I have a reservation for the presidential suite, 3 nights. Executive business package." Jordan's fingers paused on the keyboard. "Morgan," he repeated, almost skeptically. He looked back at her longer this time. But this wasn't a look of hospitality. It was a mental audit. A silent interrogation. "You?" He tapped again, nodding slowly. "Ah yes. I see the reservation. Let me verify the details." His voice trailed off as he clicked through tabs with a lazy tempo. "And, may I have your card for incidentals?" Without a word, Celeste reached into a leather compartment of her purse and drew out a card. It was solid titanium, black with a silver edge. No name on the front. No numbers. Just weight, presence, and a legacy built not on spending but on being invited. The Centurion card. Jordan didn't reach for it. He smirked. A tiny, mocking smirk. "These usually max out quickly," he muttered, loud enough for the suited man behind Celeste to hear. The room didn't gasp, but it stiffened. Someone chuckled behind a magazine near the fireplace. A woman sipping tea narrowed her eyes. A hotel clerk walking past paused mid-step. Celeste did not react. Her face was still, serene. But her eyes, they hardened. Not with rage. Not even with pain. But with the glint of steel, the kind forged in fires far hotter than this lobby's passive-aggressive air conditioning. Jordan, oblivious to the shift in the room, continued. "It might take a moment to process. Sometimes there's a delay with these elite cards." He said elite as if it had quotation marks around it. She placed the card flat on the glass. It landed with a soft clink, but the sound echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. Jordan finally picked it up. He held it like it was counterfeit. "Oh, this one." His voice thinned, faux polite. "Interesting. We usually see these from our international clients." He swiped it. The system processed without a hitch. "No issues," the machine confirmed. Jordan ignored it. "I'll check if the suite is ready." But, he clicked a few keys, then pursed his lips. "Looks like there's been an issue with the upgrade confirmation. We have a deluxe king available on the 9th floor. Not the presidential suite." Celeste raised an eyebrow, slightly. She didn't speak. Jordan shrugged. Must have been a system error. Or perhaps, he eyed the card again, a verification delay. It wasn't a delay. It was a decision. She knew it. And so did he. Celeste took her card back with the same calm grace and tucked it into her purse. "I'll take the room," she said softly. Her voice was ice under velvet. She turned without another word and walked toward the elevators. The sound of her heels once again cut clean across the lobby. Each step said what she didn't: "I see you. I remember this." Behind her, Jordan watched, suddenly unsure of himself. He glanced around. Several eyes were still on him. A middle-aged man shook his head. A bellhop whispered something to a colleague. One of the front desk clerks looked visibly nervous. But it was too late. Celeste entered the elevator. She didn't sigh. She didn't frown. She just closed her eyes for half a second. In her mind, the report had already started. This wasn't the first time she had seen this pattern. But what made this moment different was that she wasn't here for a vacation. She was here for a decision. A $2.80 billion decision. Back in her room, a minimalist yet luxurious space with views of the Chicago skyline but not the panoramic ones promised, Celeste opened her laptop. An open spreadsheet blinked at her, already titled Monarch Plaza Assessment, Phase 4, Human Interaction Metrics. She added a line: check-in experience, failure to validate VIP reservation. Staff, Jordan Voss. Remarks, racial profiling suspected. Tone, dismissive. Environment, public. Humiliation risk, high. She paused. Then, she added, no visible anger. No confrontation. Just data. Outside the window, the sun dipped lower over Lake Michigan. Tourists snapped selfies on the magnificent mile. The city bustled. But in room 916, a quiet audit had begun, one that could destroy empires not with outrage, but with evidence. By the time sunlight filtered through the floor-length curtains of room 916, Celeste Morgan was already awake. She had been since 5:15 a.m., sipping black coffee brewed in silence, watching the city come alive through a partial view of the skyline, a reminder that her room was not the one she'd booked, but the one she was given. This morning wasn't just another hotel morning. It was another test. She dressed differently today. Gone was the navy suit. Instead, she wore a modest gray midi dress, soft loafers, and a thin cashmere cardigan. The kind of outfit that whispered consultant instead of power. Unassuming. Strategic. She didn't want them to recognize influence. She wanted to see what they did when they thought it wasn't there. At 7:45 a.m., Celeste exited her room with just her phone and a keycard. She headed down to the Monarch Lounge, the private breakfast area reserved for VIPs, executive package holders, penthouse guests, and platinum members. Her reservation included access. It had been confirmed twice by email. At the entrance to the lounge, she was stopped by a young staff member in a black vest and name tag that read Carla R. Carla looked barely 20, her expression confused, uncertain but not kind. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice polite but cool. "This section is for guests with VIP or executive package access only." Celeste offered a polite nod. Room 916. Executive package confirmed at booking. Carla gave a stiff smile and tapped the screen of her iPad. I'll need to check the system. Celeste stood quietly, holding up her room keycard as proof. Carla checked the screen, paused, and squinted slightly. According to this, she said slowly, your package doesn't include lounge access. There it was. A contradiction not of technology, but of intention. No access. Celeste echoed. Would you like me to show the confirmation email? Carla's response was instant. I believe the system, ma'am. If you'd like breakfast, the regular buffet is on the mezzanine. A couple behind Celeste shifted awkwardly. One man adjusted his tie, clearly aware of the tension but too cowardly to speak. Celeste didn't argue. She smiled politely, nodded once, and walked away. But as she turned the corner, out of sight of the lounge, she pulled out her phone. She snapped a photo of the lounge entrance, her keycard in her hand. A second photo of the staff member's name tag. Then she opened her internal evaluation app and typed, denied access to VIP lounge. Booking confirmation attached. Staff, Carla R. Tone, curt. Visual reaction to race and appearance noted. No system override offered. No managerial escalation. Public tone, neutral. Subtext, dismissive. She walked slowly toward the mezzanine-level buffet, not because she was hungry, but because every move today was surveillance. At the base of the staircase, she passed the concierge desk. Two employees were engaged in hushed conversation. One of them, a man with a platinum blonde undercut, about 40 years old, glanced toward Celeste as she passed. His words were low, but she caught them. Another PR stunt, he whispered, shaking his head. No idea why they keep sending them in. Them. He didn't need to say more. He didn't say black. He didn't say diversity. He didn't say quota. But the implication settled into the air like mold in an old wall undetected unless you knew where to look. Celeste didn't stop. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. But in her mind, the checklist grew. At 8:34 a.m., she sat at a table in the public breakfast area, far from the polished leather and soft jazz of the VIP lounge. Her water glass had fingerprints on it. The table hadn't been properly wiped. And the server addressed her without a greeting, dropping her coffee like it was a transaction, not service. She didn't complain. She just typed, contrast in service delivery between lounge and mezzanine. Server did not greet. No napkin. No offer of assistance. Staff energy, disengaged. Targeted indifference suspected. An hour later, she entered the hotel gym, another executive amenity. The front desk receptionist at the fitness center, a tall, wiry security staff member in a branded polo shirt, paused when she presented her key. Room number 916, he flipped the card in his hand. Twice. I need to verify that, he said. Is there an issue? He shrugged. Today the gym is only accessible by prior appointment. It's a new policy. Celeste glanced behind her. A white man in a tracksuit walked past with no keycard, no questions asked. The receptionist nodded at him with familiarity and waved him in. Celeste looked back at the staff member. His eyes avoided hers. That's fine, she said calmly. I'll use another gym. And then she smiled, a cold, clean smile. Not polite. Not angry. Just final. Back in her room, Celeste uploaded 3 new photo entries, timestamped, VIP lounge denial. Racially coded language from concierge. Unequal access at gym facilities. She highlighted each line in red, noting severity, pattern confirmed. Not isolated. Behavior systemic, not accidental. Stratified exclusion model observed. Then she paused, staring out the window at the early Chicago bustle. This wasn't just a bad hotel experience. This was a system playing its script, but this time, it was being recorded by someone fluent in its language. Celeste leaned back in her chair and whispered to no one. "You think because I don't raise my voice, you can keep playing the same game." She took a sip of cold water and reopened the spreadsheet. By midday, Celeste walked past the concierge desk again. The platinum-haired man was gone. In his place stood a young woman, polite, but robotic. Celeste asked about reserving a taxi for the next day. The concierge barely looked up. "What's the destination?" she asked, hands already typing. Celeste gave it. The concierge nodded, didn't smile. "Noted," she said. No offer of suggestions, no map, no smile, nothing that the guest in front of her had received seconds before. A white couple. Tourists. As Celeste turned to leave, she heard the woman say under her breath, "Always so particular." Celeste stopped, half-turned. But then she smiled. And walked away. Back in her room, she noted, concierge pattern persistent. Subtle commentary on perceived behavior. Staff-to-staff consistency indicates cultural norm. At 2:13 p.m., she reviewed all footage from her hidden lapel recorder. Voices. Glances. Dismissals. Everything timed, everything placed in sequence. She wasn't just a guest. She was a silent witness to a culture cloaked in hospitality and weaponized through smiles that never reached the eyes. In her notes, she wrote, "The Monarch Plaza, like many luxury spaces, practices a form of exclusion that's too smooth to be seen unless you've lived through it before. The key isn't in what they say, but in who they question, who they ignore, and who they quietly steer away from privilege." She closed her laptop and stood by the window. Down below, the monarch's guests sipped wine in the sunlit terrace. Bellboys smiled at arriving guests. A valet laughed with a suit-clad businessman. And somewhere within all that elegance, the truth was hiding. But not for long. By 4 p.m., Celeste Morgan had transformed her hotel suite into a private investigation room. The desk, a polished walnut rectangle set beside a floor-to-ceiling window, was now her command center. On it sat her MacBook Pro, a leather-bound notebook filled with tightly spaced writing, and a hidden recording transmitter connected to her blazer's lapel mic. 3 folders, each labeled by service category: reception, concierge, and amenity access, lay side by side, neatly tabbed in crimson. She didn't pace. She didn't rant. Instead, she listened. Over and over again. The audio recordings played on low volume, a concierge whispering, another PR stunt, a receptionist insisting her executive access didn't exist. A gym attendant requiring prior reservation but only from her. She isolated timestamps. Took screenshots from video feeds. Labeled each entry with a severity score and bias flag. Each whisper, each slight pause, each double take, they weren't random. They were calibrated behaviors that had escaped scrutiny because they were wrapped in silk. But not anymore. Celeste glanced at her watch. It was nearly 5:45 p.m. time for the restaurant test. She changed clothes this time, choosing a sleek black cocktail dress, modest but perfectly tailored. Her hair was pulled into a neat twist. She wore no jewelry, carried no handbag, and left her laptop open on the desk, as if she were just stepping out for a glass of wine, not walking into another layer of institutional bias. She took the elevator down to the mezzanine floor, where the Monarch Terrace restaurant stretched beneath golden chandeliers and thick velvet drapes. The smell of truffle oil and pan-seared halibut lingered in the air, woven into the hush of moneyed conversations. The hostess desk gleamed in soft light. Celeste approached with the calm ease of someone who belonged. "Reservation for 1, she said gently. Celeste Morgan. 6:15. The hostess Megan, a young woman with chestnut hair tied in a bun, smiled tightly. "1 moment." Her fingers flew over the touchpad. Then, her eyes lifted. A pause. Just a beat too long. Not enough to be obvious but enough for Celeste to feel it. "Yes," Megan finally said. "We have a table for you. However, the window section is full. I'll take you to a seat inside." Celeste turned her head slightly, eyes drifting toward the expansive windowside area. 3 tables were visibly empty. No reserved signs. No water glasses. No guests. A waiter stood nearby, polishing a wine glass and glancing at Megan. There was no mistake. Only a decision. Celeste didn't argue. She didn't even blink. "Inside is fine," she said simply. Megan led her past the empty tables, past a family of 4 laughing softly, past 2 older men in conversation, and into the back corner. A table next to a frosted glass divider, away from view, away from light. As Megan placed the menu in front of her, Celeste smiled politely. "Thank you." The moment Megan walked away, Celeste tapped a button on the inside seam of her coat. A silent vibration confirmed the recording was live. She sat with her hands folded, her gaze fixed on the reflection in her water glass, which perfectly captured the hostess station. 5 minutes later, a middle-aged white couple walked in. No reservation. Celeste watched as Megan's face lit up. She nodded, laughed softly at something the man said, and then she led them to a table by the window. The exact one Celeste had asked for. No hesitation. No screen check. No excuses. Celeste reached into the side pocket of her blazer and pulled out her phone. She snapped a discreet photo of the couple being seated, timestamped it, and whispered into her coat lapel, "Megan. Table by window. No prior reservation. Confirmed visual, 3 empty tables. Deliberate seating redirection observed. VIP policy discrepancy." The waiter approached. "Still deciding?" he asked, glancing at her once, then darting his eyes to another table. "Yes," Celeste replied calmly. "I'll have the sea base, please. No appetizer. Still water." The waiter nodded, said nothing, and walked away without so much as a smile. 10 minutes later, her dish arrived. The water didn't. She reminded the waiter. He nodded, disappeared, and returned 7 minutes later, apologizing. But his apology wasn't sincere. His voice was rushed. His tone a practiced neutrality that rang cold. Celeste noted it all. At 8:05 p.m., she visited the gym again. The same security guard from earlier was gone. In his place was a young woman, perhaps new. Celeste scanned in. No issues. No questions. The woman smiled and handed her a towel. "Enjoy your workout, Ms. Morgan." No resistance. No hoops. No hesitation. Why? Celeste wondered. A shift change? Or had someone begun to suspect who she was? Still, she walked inside, used the elliptical for 15 minutes, then returned to her room. She hadn't come to break a sweat. She had come to measure consistency. And inconsistency was what she had found. Back in her suite, she uploaded the footage from her hidden camera. She replayed Megan's decision to deny her the window seat. Rewatched the hostess warmly seat the white couple. Zoomed into the timestamp. Synced it with the audio of the hostess' false claim, "The window area is full." She clipped the section and saved it into a new folder, Intentional Discrepancy, Tier 1 Discrimination Evidence. In her report, she wrote, "Seating decisions within restaurant space reflect intentional bias based on race, class assumptions, and perceived social value. No explicit denial. Covert exclusion through reassignment." She glanced at the desk clock. 9:16 p.m. Still more to test. She opened the room phone and dialed room service. The male voice on the other end sounded rushed. "Yes. I'd like to order a tea set and 2 bottles of water." The man paused. You're in room 916. Yes. Silence. Then, this service ended at 9. Celeste checked the guest manual. Room service closed at 9:30. She responded gently. The guest guide says 9:30. Another pause. Must be outdated. Sorry, ma'am. Click. Celeste didn't call back. She simply added another entry. Room service declined 14 minutes before listed cutoff. Staff tone impatient. Verification bypassed. Pattern of denial without protocol enforcement confirmed. By 10 p.m., the lights in her room were dim. Only the glow of the laptop remained. Celeste sat cross-legged on the armchair, reviewing every collected detail. Each note. Each voice. Each act of elegant exclusion. She compiled the footage into a presentation-style folder. Not for the public. Not for PR. But for a single audience, the board at Dominion Equity Ventures. The corporation whose $2.8 billion partnership deal with Monarch's parent company was pending final approval. And that approval would not come. Not after what Celeste had seen. She stared out the window one last time before bed. Below, the city glittered. Traffic buzzed. And somewhere beneath it all, people moved, lived, dreamed and were judged before they spoke. She whispered under her breath, they think what they do is harmless. But it's never harmless. It's calculated. And now, it's documented. At precisely 7:55 a.m., 2 days after checking into the Monarch Plaza Hotel, Celeste Morgan stepped into the lobby once again. She wore the same midnight navy suit she had arrived in, the collar perfectly pressed, a single silver pin in the shape of a triangle clipped to her lapel, the symbol of the Global Fairness Review program she had architected. Her expression was composed, unreadable. She didn't look left or right, made no small talk, and walked straight to the front desk where her stay had quietly begun, with a smile that wasn't sincere and a comment that wasn't harmless. Behind the desk, Jordan Voss was already typing something into his terminal, feigning busy as he always did when he sensed the presence of someone he didn't respect. His gaze lifted, and for the briefest of seconds, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He recognized her now. She hadn't changed much in 2 days, but something about the stillness in her posture, the way her eyes met his directly, stripped away the illusion of control he had wrapped himself in. His mouth opened, smile automatic. Good morning, ma'am. How can I assist you today? Celeste didn't smile. She simply placed her purse on the counter and spoke in a voice calm, measured, and edged with steel. Good morning, Jordan. I'd like to know why I was treated like a fraud here. The smile faltered just slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. She tilted her head. Let me help. The comment about my Centurion card on the day I checked in. The downgrade of my suite, despite confirmed booking. The denial of lounge access, though I purchased the executive package. The window seat in the restaurant that was mysteriously unavailable. The gym access that suddenly required a reservation. The whisper about a PR stunt from your concierge. Shall I go on? Jordan's face drained of color. The lobby had begun to stir, guests checking out, bellhops rolling carts, but the energy shifted. Something unseen pressed into the space. The receptionist beside Jordan paused mid-keystroke. A porter slowed his steps. The air grew dense, heavy. Celeste reached into her purse and drew out a small, heavy item. She placed it gently on the counter. A solid black business card, no slogan, no clutter. Just a silver border, and the words, Celeste Morgan, Senior Director of Global Compliance, Dominion Equity Ventures. Jordan stared. His eyes widened, but his mouth couldn't move. I didn't come here to hear an apology, she said. I came to inform you that Dominion has completed its final evaluation report of the Monarch Plaza and its parent company. The report has been submitted to the Corporate Ethics Board, our investors, and a network of international media outlets. Jordan froze. His hands trembled above the keyboard. He looked around, as if expecting someone to intervene, but no one moved. Celeste continued, and I came to demonstrate how a seemingly harmless remark, a smile with a sneer behind it, can bring an entire operation to its knees. She stepped back slightly. Had there been even one respectful moment, one single act of decency, I would have been the one signing the expansion contract for your international rollout. She paused. But instead, you chose to mock a black woman before checking her name. A guest in line pulled out his phone and began recording. Another whispered to a friend. The moment was crystallizing into something larger than the lobby, larger than the hotel. It was no longer a quiet indignity, it was a reckoning. Just then, the internal phone behind the desk rang. The receptionist, clearly rattled, picked it up. Her eyes darted toward Jordan. "Mr. Voss, the regional executive just called. He wants to see you. Immediately." Jordan didn't move. Celeste stared at him with calm detachment. "Do you know what you just did?" she asked, her voice softer now, but even colder. "You didn't just lose a client. You lost the future. You made it impossible for your brand to pretend it stands for anything other than exclusion." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. But somehow, every word hit harder than a raised voice ever could. Then she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked on the marble-like punctuation marks to a verdict. The sound was surgical, clean, final. The lobby remained silent. A woman behind a rolling suitcase whispered, "That's her. The one from the report." 10 minutes later, a video under 45 seconds long appeared online. The caption read, "Dominion Equity's black executive confronts hotel receptionist who mocked her, leaves him speechless." Within hours, the hashtag Celeste Morgan and hashtag Know Her Name began trending on Twitter, then LinkedIn, Instagram, and beyond. On the 39th floor of Dominion Equity Ventures in Washington, D.C., the board of directors had already received a copy of her full audit. The meeting to vote on the $2.8 billion investment deal with Monarch's parent company was cancelled. Instead, the agenda was updated to immediate termination of partnership negotiations, failure to meet corporate ethics standards. Across the city of Chicago, news outlets picked up the story. First the local ones, then the national networks. CNN ran the headline, "Executive exposes discrimination at five-star hotel, $2.8 billion deal cancelled after silent audit." Dominion's official statement followed an hour later, "Dominion Equity Ventures does not invest in structures that profit from systemic exclusion. We believe excellence begins at the front desk." At the Monarch Plaza, chaos erupted. Dozens of emails from clients, partners, vendors, and potential investors began flooding the inboxes of the corporate communications team. Bookings were cancelled. Events were postponed. Within 36 hours, Monarch's public rating had dropped by 23%. But Celeste? She didn't watch the news. She didn't give interviews. She returned to her room, packed her single carry-on suitcase, and checked out through the back exit. No dramatics. No press photos. She wasn't interested in becoming the face of a movement. She was here to finish a report, and she had. The system had exposed itself. And she simply let it collapse under the weight of its own assumptions. By 10:43 a.m. on the same day, Celeste Morgan confronted the front desk at the Monarch Plaza. The top floor of Dominion Equity Ventures was in absolute silence. The executive boardroom, usually filled with financial forecasts and projected earnings, now displayed one thing on its primary screen, a 43-second video that had already been viewed over 2 million times. The footage showed Celeste, composed, calm, standing at the reception desk with Jordan Voss frozen in place behind it. Her words were clear, devastating in their precision. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call for cameras. She just said the truth, and the world listened. The board chair, Angela Raines, turned to the others and spoke with finality, "The Monarch deal is cancelled. Effective immediately. Failure to meet corporate ethics standards. No further negotiation. No one objected. No one even blinked. Dominion's official investigation report was released to the public within an hour. It was titled, Behavioral Disparities in Premium Hospitality, the Monarch Case Study. It included over 70 pages of documentation, audio clips, video stills, time-coded transcriptions, and comparative service analyses. But it wasn't just the details that landed like thunder, it was the conclusion. These events do not represent isolated mistakes. They reflect a structurally embedded culture of soft discrimination, perpetuated by unchecked autonomy at key customer touchpoints. The internet didn't wait. A black lawyer in Atlanta posted, "I was told to use the service entrance at Monarch LA even though I was the keynote speaker for their conference." A tech VP from Seattle tweeted, "I canceled all company travel bookings at Monarch Properties. Respect is non-negotiable." The storm had form, purpose, and fury. Within 24 hours, Monarch Holdings lost $900 million in projected market value. Investors began pulling out. Major event planners withdrew contracts. A European airline dropped its travel bundle partnership. The dominoes had started to fall. But this wasn't just corporate damage. It was personal exposure. Reddit users uncovered Jordan Voss's LinkedIn, his former tweets, even screenshots from a private Facebook group where he had once joked, "Black card. More like black costume jewelry. Anyone can act rich these days." The comments exploded. Within hours, Jordan's social media accounts were suspended. He was removed from the Monarch employee directory by the next morning. A leaked memo showed that Human Resources had terminated his contract immediately, citing gross misconduct and reputational damage. But the story didn't end there. Richard Pullman, the regional director of operations who had dismissed prior discrimination complaints submitted by employees at Monarch's flagship Chicago location, was also suspended indefinitely pending review. Internal HR documents surfaced, dozens of them showing ignored complaints over 2 years, many of them filed anonymously by black and brown employees. Suddenly, this wasn't Celeste's story. It became everyone's story. Newsrooms across the country dedicated full segments to the incident. The New York Times ran a headline, "When Silence is a Statement, The Rise of Corporate Ethics Through Quiet Resistance." On MSNBC, a panel discussed the cultural impact of a woman who had dismantled an entire luxury facade without screaming, suing, or storming out. What she did was redefine power, one expert said. She proved that dignity, when paired with data, can be a weapon more lethal than outrage. At the Monarch Plaza itself, the ripple effects were immediate. Customers began canceling reservations. Travel review platforms lit up with 1-star ratings and stories previously untold. "My mother was asked 3 times to verify her identity here," one user wrote. "I thought it was normal until I saw Celeste's video." It wasn't. The PR team released a statement, bland and defensive. "We deeply regret any misunderstanding that occurred and are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion." But the world had moved past apologies. The world wanted accountability. Within 3 days, the Monarch Holdings board issued a public letter declaring a full overhaul of corporate training, leadership structure, and internal complaint protocols. They weren't leading the change, they were scrambling to catch up. Meanwhile, in a quiet office at Dominion's Washington, D.C. headquarters, Celeste sat at her desk, editing a new report on an unrelated investment review. She didn't look at the news. She didn't check hashtags. She didn't schedule interviews. Her assistant filtered out the calls, the speaking invitations, the magazine cover offers. When asked if she would speak at a TED Talk titled, "Composure as Power," her response was short, "Respectfully decline." When Time magazine requested a profile, she simply replied through her secretary, "Let the report speak for itself." But the world didn't stop speaking about her. Business schools from Stanford to Wharton began dissecting the Monarch collapse in their ethics modules. Leadership seminars used her report as a blueprint. Firms across hospitality, tech, and retail announced internal audits, many of them voluntarily for the first time. At Ernst & Young, a new service launched, the Whittaker Standard, named not by Celeste but by an independent ethics board who viewed her methodology as the new benchmark for auditing unconscious bias. But Celeste didn't want the glory. She kept her routine. She arrived at 8 a.m., drank her black coffee no sugar, and spent her days buried in contracts, data, and silence. Only her office bookshelf hinted at anything unusual. One photo, framed in black and white, her grandmother, in a diner uniform from the 1960s Mississippi, folding napkins with grace while two white men laughed nearby. It wasn't anger that drove Celeste. It was memory. It was the recognition that injustice doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it's a seating chart. A reservation that gets lost. A smile that fades too quickly. A card that probably maxes out. Her revolution didn't begin with a protest sign. It began with a question posed silently, but unignorable: why are we still here? And the industry had no answer. Because they were too used to assuming no one would dare to ask. And Celeste Morgan didn't need to ask out loud. She just needed to show up, stand still, and let their system unravel itself. In the 3 weeks following the release of Dominion's audit report, the landscape of the global hospitality industry began to shift, not from pressure, not from fear, but from the undeniable clarity of one meticulously documented act of exclusion. Over 40 major hotel groups across North America, Europe, and the Middle East initiated internal ethics reviews. These weren't PR gestures. These were full-scale restructurings, corporate departments carved open like sealed vaults, decades of unspoken practices being aired out for the first time. From Hong Kong to Houston, whispered customs and informal gatekeeping were now being pulled into the light. Monarch Holdings had become the case study no brand wanted to be, and Celeste Morgan had become the silent architect of a new standard. They called it the Whittaker Protocol in some circles, the Morgan Test in others, though she had never endorsed a name, never commented on the terminology. But she didn't need to. Her work had done what headlines couldn't. It left a blueprint. At Monarch's headquarters, located in a glass tower on Wacker Drive in Chicago, panic met paralysis. Staff turnover skyrocketed. A leaked resignation letter from the former director of guest services circulated widely among travel industry forums. We were trained to smile, not to serve. We were taught how to say no politely, how to withhold access without confrontation. Celeste didn't just reveal us, she forced us to look in the mirror. I'm leaving because I no longer know what I represent here. The Monarch brand was hemorrhaging. 5 international partners withdrew their annual event commitments. 2 airlines severed bundled travel deals. Travel influencers who once promoted their penthouses now posted, before and after, reels comparing service footage and drawing sharp conclusions. Meanwhile, Ernst & Young launched a division that would become industry-defining, the Ethical Hospitality Audit Unit, modeled directly from the Dominion investigation template. The first service released was called the Whittaker Standard. It featured blind bias testing at reception desks, anonymous mystery guests, and behavioral pattern recognition algorithms. One executive at EY said during their launch, she didn't just expose a system, she created the framework to rebuild one. Universities responded, too. From Harvard to INSEAD, the Monarch collapse was added to curriculum in business ethics, leadership, and brand management. Students didn't study it as a PR disaster, but as a systems failure, a breakdown not of policy, but of humanity disguised by decorum. A guest not greeted. A card not trusted. A smile not returned. All stitched together into a pattern that had for too long been accepted as standard procedure. And now, that very standard had a counterweight. Inside Dominion Equity Ventures, Celeste remained as invisible as ever. She declined every media interview, including a 6-figure offer from a top documentary studio. Her only public-facing comment came via internal memo, shared by her assistant with approval: ethics is not the absence of scandal. It's the presence of accountability. That single line was reposted over 500,000 times. Even late-night hosts quoted it. Trevor Noah opened his monologue, a black woman walks into a hotel, gets dismissed, drops a business card, and walks out with the empire. That's not revenge. That's architecture. But Celeste never raised her voice to confirm it. She kept working. She reviewed 3 new investment proposals that week. One from a green energy startup. One from an ethical fintech group. And one from a global travel chain asking to be evaluated under the Whitaker standard before applying for Dominion funding. The shift had begun. Not just in hospitality, but in how corporate ethics were now being defined not by slogans, but by who you failed to see when they walked through your door. Across the country, stories emerged. Quiet ones. A black woman in Detroit who had always been asked to double-check her corporate card was now greeted with respect because her company had sent Celeste's audit as a staff training tool. A front desk agent in London admitted anonymously on Glassdoor that he had never realized how coded his interactions were until a new onboarding system made him review a video of Celeste's confrontation and rate the behavior without knowing the context. It wasn't just guilt spreading. It was awareness. It was the understanding that exclusion doesn't require a locked door. Sometimes it's just who you look at when you say, welcome. In the midst of it all, Celeste said little. Her office stayed the same. Same framed photo of her grandmother. Same silver-trimmed notebook. Same 15-inch screen. No trophies, no plaques, no updated bio. She didn't even edit her LinkedIn. But inside her inbox were thousands of messages. From students. From interns. From strangers. One note came from a young woman at a historically black college who wrote, "I never thought someone who looked like me could change anything without shouting. Now I know we can change everything by standing still." Another message came from an internal whistleblower at a rival hotel chain. "They told us not to seek people who looked less than refined by the window. That's all they'd say. I never questioned it. Until you." Celeste never replied to most messages. But she read them. Every single one. She highlighted some. Printed others. Folded them neatly and placed them in the drawer beneath her desk. Not for display. Just for remembrance. For grounding. For balance. Because while the world debated her methods, praised her poise, speculated on her intentions, Celeste had never done it for recognition. She had done it because she knew what it meant to be looked at and not seen. To be evaluated, weighed, and dismissed before ever saying a word. The Monarch Plaza still stood. Same marble floors. Same chandeliers. But the soul of the building had changed. Guests entered differently now. Employees stood straighter, quieter, as if the walls themselves had retained the echo of her footsteps. Some staff referred to her presence as the day of the card. Not because of the value on the card, but because of the weight it carried. A business card, placed without sound, but loud enough to silence an entire lobby. By the end of that month, Monarch Holdings lost 26% of its market value. The CEO resigned. A global training overhaul was announced. But those were symptoms. The real shift had already happened quietly, methodically, the way most permanent change does. And at the center of that shift stood one woman, who never raised her voice, never chased a headline, and never once asked for revenge. She asked for nothing. Except accountability. In one final quiet moment that month, as Celeste locked up her office for the night, a junior analyst passed her in the hallway. A recent hire. Young, eager, uncertain. She hesitated, then turned back. "Ms. Morgan," she said, voice soft, "why didn't you say anything? I mean, back at the hotel. Why didn't you just call them out?" Celeste paused at the elevator. Her expression unreadable. "Because they already said everything," she replied. "All I had to do, was listen." Then she stepped into the elevator, doors sliding shut behind her like a final chapter turning itself. While the hotel industry was scrambling to redefine itself, and companies across 3 continents revised internal conduct policies, the man at the center of the first domino, the one who triggered it all with a smile too thin and a comment too casual, had vanished. Jordan Voss was no longer a hotel receptionist. He was no longer anything. Within 24 hours of the confrontation video going viral, his identity had been confirmed and catalogued by the internet. Old tweets surfaced. Facebook screenshots. Comments in private groups where he mocked people with power complexes who pretend to be guests when they're clearly not. On LinkedIn, his profile was flagged more than 12,000 times. It was shut down automatically. He attempted to create a new one under a new name, but screenshots circulated too fast. He applied for a front desk job at a boutique hotel in Vermont. Rejected. Applied as a waiter at a wedding venue in Maine. A guest recognized him and posted a photo on Reddit. This guy once mocked a black executive for using a Centurion card. Now he's pouring wine at someone else's wedding. Karma wears heels. Jordan Voss eventually retreated to a small cabin in rural Wyoming. No hotel chains. No conference centers. Just silence, isolation, and a name that had become a digital scar. He wore hats now. And sunglasses. And a high-collared coat even when it was warm. He didn't talk to neighbors. He disconnected his internet. He lived not in shame but in exile from a role he once thought gave him control. Because that was the real loss, not his job, not his reputation, but the illusion that he had ever been the one deciding who mattered. But Celeste Morgan never spoke his name again. She never filed a lawsuit. Never called for punishment. The system had judged him far more ruthlessly than she ever would. And that was the difference. She had stood tall. He had been reduced. In an op-ed for The Guardian, a journalist wrote, Jordan wasn't destroyed by social media. He was undone by the very performance he thought gave him power: the smirk, the pause, the sarcasm. They weren't just impolite. They were architectural. And Celeste made us all see the scaffolding. While Monarch tried to quietly repair its broken frame, other hotels took notice. Aurelius Hospitality Group announced the adoption of blind hiring practices. Monarch Residences International launched anonymous guest feedback channels with direct access to a third-party ethics board. Horizon Collection invested in immersive training programs using virtual simulations to teach staff how unconscious bias manifests in microinteractions. For the first time, change wasn't cosmetic. It was procedural. The Whitaker Standard was being adopted across industries: healthcare, retail, corporate leasing. Everyone had a front desk, after all. Everyone had a gatekeeper. And now, everyone had a reason to examine what those gatekeepers had been doing in plain sight. Meanwhile, Celeste Morgan remained where she had always been, at her desk, quiet, focused, never in the spotlight. Her office was unchanged. No trophies. No photos from the lobby incident. No commemorative plaques. Just her grandmother's framed black and white photo. Just her work. She received hundreds of invitations: Harvard, Davos, TED, but turned them all down with the same simple reply: Miss Morgan does not accept public engagements at this time. A podcast producer once asked her assistant, why doesn't she speak? She could lead a movement. The assistant smiled. She already did. One day, months after the incident, a handwritten letter arrived at Dominion's office. It came from a young black woman working as a hotel trainee in Baltimore. It read, "Every day, I watch them treat people differently. Some get smiles. Some get stares. I didn't think I could do anything. Then I saw your video. You didn't shout. You didn't shame. You stood still. That gave me the strength to raise my hand. Thank you for teaching me that dignity isn't passive, it's precise." Celeste read that letter twice, then folded it and placed it in the same drawer where dozens of other letters now lived, evidence not of her victory, but of what had started moving after her silence. And she knew. This was the legacy. Not the video. Not the trending hashtags. But the questions left behind. Because after Monarch, no one could enter a hotel without wondering, will I be seen? Will I be heard? Will I be measured before I speak? And if the answer was yes, would someone dare to place a business card on the desk and say, I deserve better, without needing to shout it? A year later, at a quiet university lecture on brand reputation, a professor asked her class, what caused the collapse of Monarch Holdings? A student raised their hand. Discrimination, they said. Another student added, arrogance. But a third, a young woman with a gray blazer and calm voice, answered, assumption. They assumed they knew who she was. And they assumed she would stay silent. That, perhaps, was the most accurate answer. Because assumption is where empires crack when they forget that anyone, anywhere, could be the one watching. Documenting. Measuring. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing in the room isn't the person shouting, it's the one who doesn't have to. That evening, Celeste left work at her usual hour. She didn't know that a hotel in Tokyo had just cited her report in a board meeting. Or that a hospitality CEO in Milan had ordered his team to rewatch her lobby video weekly as training. Or that a scholarship was being named in her honor for black women pursuing ethics in business. She simply walked down the hallway, heels steady, posture composed, into an elevator that closed without fanfare. As the doors shut, a colleague nearby whispered to another, that's her. That's the woman who brought down Monarch. But Celeste, standing quietly inside the elevator, didn't flinch. She wasn't thinking about Monarch. She wasn't thinking about Jordan. She was thinking about the next report waiting on her desk. Because the work wasn't done. The world still had front desks. And someone still had to ask the hard questions quietly, precisely, powerfully. Silence is not weakness. When you know your worth, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard, you just need to stand tall and let the truth echo through the cracks. The story of Celeste Morgan reminds us that real power doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. Sometimes, it simply walks in, lays down a single business card, and watches as the system reveals its own rot. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standards. About dignity over drama. And about a woman who didn't need to expose anyone because their behavior did that on its own. Let this story be a reminder, justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes, it comes with proof. Respect isn't a privilege, it's a minimum requirement. And power doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes, it looks like stillness. Like composure. Like Celeste. Thank you for watching and staying with us through this incredible journey. Stories like this aren't just about one person, they're about all of us. About every moment we were overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated yet chose to rise without shouting. Have you ever been judged unfairly because of how you look, where you're from, or the role someone assumed you were playing? Share your story in the comments, your voice might be the next quiet revolution. And if this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another tale that proves ordinary people can spark extraordinary change. Because sometimes, all it takes, is one business card.